Madam President, I rise today to be a voice for the 3.5 million American citizens living on the island of Puerto Rico. I rise so their concerns for themselves, their families, their livelihoods will be heard. To ask that we improve a House-passed legislation known as PROMESA. Now, the word PROMESA in Spanish and English would mean promise. But the only thing the House bill promises is the people of Puerto Rico is years of subjugation at the hands of an anti-democratic control board. Now, all of us in the Senate are faced soon with an immediate and serious choice, one which will have profound consequences on the people of Puerto Rico for a generation. I've said from the beginning, in terms of the challenge that Puerto Rico has, $70 billion debt, pays 1/3 of every dollar it receives towards paying interest, unsustainable for them, unsustainable for any governmental entity that would face that challenge, made tough, horrible decisions, closed schools, closed hospitals, reduced public safety, and still cannot meet the challenge. That they need a clear path to restructuring under the bankruptcy laws. Now, that's not a bailout. A bailout is when somebody has a debt, you bring them the money and you say, okay, we're going to take care of your debt. That's not the case. Restructuring is about taking the debt that you have and giving the wherewithal for that debt to be restructured in a way that is both sustainable and can take care of the obligations therein. It needs an oversight board that represents the people, the citizens, the United States citizens of Puerto Rico, their needs, their concerns, and acknowledges and respects their democratic rights as Americans. But sadly, Madam President, the legislation passed by the House last week falls far short of what we need on several fronts. Instead of offering a clear path to restructuring, it creates more obstacles. It creates a supermajority 5-2 vote by an unelected control board to get to the possibility of restructuring that could derail the island's attempts to achieve sustainable debt payments. Without any authority to restructure its debt, all this legislation will do is take away the democratic rights of 3.5 million Americans and leave the future to wishful thinking and a prayer that the crisis will somehow be resolved. But even if the board did allow restructuring after a series of hurdles, it will come at a steep price, and that price is the right of self-governance. In return for being able to rework its debts, the people of Puerto Rico will be forced to relinquish their fundamental right to govern themselves and make their own decisions. The very same rights that we fought a revolution to secure 240 years ago. Now, this shouldn't come as a surprise, what I'm saying, to anyone who read the House Natural Resources Committee report, which was unequivocal when describing the vast powers this control board that we will be voting on will exercise. In an analysis by the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, it states, quote, the board would have broad sovereign powers to effectively overrule decisions by Puerto Rico's legislature, its governor, and other public authorities. So let me repeat that. Broad, sovereign, words have consequences, meaning in legislation and in law. Broad, sovereign powers to effectively overrule decisions made by the elected government of the 3.5 million United States citizens who call Puerto Rico their home. The Congressional Budget Office went on to say the board can, quote, effectively nullify, cancel, goodbye, hasta la vista, any new laws or policies adopted by the elected people of Puerto Rico that did not conform to requirements specified in this bill. Nullify. So not only can the control board set budgets and fiscal policy, It also has the power to veto other laws. Essentially, this means that the board combines, think of this, it combines the legislative powers of Congress with the veto powers of the executive to form an omnipotent entity, the powers of which are virtually unprecedented. We talk about checks and balances in our government as one of the creations of the founders that was essential to a modern democracy. Well, we obliterate the checks and balances and the rights of the people of Puerto Rico by having an omnipotent entity, the powers of which are virtually unprecedented. As the bill's own author noted in the committee report, and I quote, "The Oversight Board may impose mandatory cuts on Puerto Rico's government and instrumentalities, a power far beyond that exercised by the control board established for the District of Columbia when there was a control board, when the District of Columbia found itself in fiscal challenge. A power far beyond that exercised by the control board established for the District of Columbia." The fact that the Puerto Rican people will have absolutely no say over who is appointed or what action this board decides is blatant neocolonialism. Instead, their fate will be determined by 7 unelected, unaccountable members of a so-called oversight board that will act as a virtual oligarchy and impose their unchecked will on the island. If the board uses the superpowers in this bill to close more schools, shutter more hospitals, cut senior citizen pensions to the bone, if it decides to hold the fire sale and put Puerto Rico's natural wonders on the auction block to the highest bidder, if it puts balanced budgets ahead of the health, safety, and well-being of children and families, similar to how the control board travesty that unfolded in Flint, there will be nothing the people of Puerto Rico or their elected representatives can do to stop it. And of course, the bill doesn't stop there. It also provides an exception to the federal minimum wage for younger workers, and it exempts the island from recently finalized overtime protections. At a time that we're working to increase workers' wages, that people in the country have said through this election process, my wages are stagnant, I feel that I can't meet the challenges of myself and my family, PROMESA goes the opposite direction, and it actually cuts workers' wages. So it amazes me that the solution to get Puerto Rico's economy growing again is to ensure that workers make even less money. In an island of which is 3.5 million United States citizens, 40% are below the federal poverty level. So we're going to cut their wages. No, lowering people's wages is not a pro-growth strategy. What it is a pro-migration strategy. All it's going to do is intensify out-migration to the mainland, where people who are U.S. citizens, who happen to live in Puerto Rico, they're eligible for a higher minimum wage here, they have common sense overtime protections, they're eligible for full Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement, they're eligible for the child tax credit as they try to raise their child and realize their hopes and dreams and aspirations, they're eligible for the earned income tax credit. All they have to do is take one flight to the United States. And yet, we somehow think that a policy that subjugates these 3.5 million citizens and takes away essential rights they have as American citizens is going to be a good fiscal policy for us as well. Now, every time I talk about my brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico, I like to remind my colleagues in this chamber and in the others that they have fought on behalf of America since World War I. Through World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Desert Shield, Iraq, Afghanistan, the War on Terror. As a matter of fact, if you go visit the Vietnam Memorial as it commemorates its 50th anniversary, you'll find a disproportionately high number of Puerto Rican names etched in that solemn black stone as compared to the rest of the American population. I remember being in the visitor center when the Speaker of the House had a celebration of the 65th Infantry Division, an all Puerto Rican division, one of the most highly decorated in U.S. military history, known as the Borinquineros, where they receive the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest honor that Congress gives any citizen. And we talked about their enormous contributions, their sacrifices on behalf of the nation. These men and women, many gave their lives and still serve so that we can remain the land of the free. They'll go back home to where their freedom and their right to self-governance will be stripped. These heroes deserve the same rights and respect as U.S. citizens in New Jersey, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Florida, in Utah, or any other state in the nation. But what this bill tells the people of Puerto Rico is that though you may be good enough to wear the uniform of their country, you may be good enough to fight and die to defend the United States, that you are not good enough to make your own decisions, govern yourself, and have a voice in your own future. Now, I'm not advocating to completely remove all oversight powers. To the contrary, I support helping Puerto Rico make informed, prudent decisions that put it on a path to economic growth and solvency. But despite its name, the Oversight Board envisioned by this bill doesn't simply oversee, it directs, it commands, it doesn't assist, it absolutely controls potentially every significant public policy decision that affects those 3.5 million United States citizens. Now, the Senate has an opportunity to change that situation. We have a chance to improve this bill and strike the right balance. Now, I want the opportunity to offer a number of targeted, common-sense amendments to restore a proper balance and ensure the people of Puerto Rico have a say in their future, and to temper the powers of the control board and give the people of Puerto Rico more of a say as to who's on the board that's going to determine their future for quite some time. Now, Madam President, I know, as all of us know, success is never guaranteed, but at the very least, the people of Puerto Rico deserve a thorough and thoughtful debate on the Senate floor. I do not take lightly, nor should my colleagues, a decision to infringe upon the democratic rights of the 3.5 million United States citizens in Puerto Rico. Those 3.5 million American citizens living in Puerto Rico and their 5 million family members living in our states and in our districts deserve more than the Senate holding its nose to improve an inferior solution. And I'm pleased to say that this sentiment has some bipartisan support, as I sent a letter with Senator Wicker to Senate leadership asking for a full and thorough debate. And I hope we do not get jammed at the final moment as an attempt to push an undemocratic bill through the Senate by waiting to the very end of this session as a tactical maneuver to avoid a thoughtful debate and an opportunity for amendments. I take Majority Leader McConnell at his word when he said, quote, "We need to open up the legislative process in a way that allows more amendments from both sides." And I'm hopeful he's going to honor that commitment. Like some of my colleagues, I was once a member of the House of Representatives, and I have enormous respect for that chamber. But I didn't get elected to the Senate to abdicate my responsibility and simply rubber stamp whatever bills come over from the House of Representatives. And I would hope that we would immediately call up this bill for debate and do what we were elected to do, fix problems and make the lives of the American people better. These 3.5 million citizens, just because they are Puerto Rican, they are no less a citizen than you or the presiding officer or my colleagues who are on the floor, or those who get to serve in this institution. They deserve better. They deserve better than to be jammed with an undemocratic process that will affect their lives in ways far beyond anybody in this chamber would be willing to accept. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor.